Hello and welcome to this week's Career Insights from 1080. I'm joined again today by Katherine and Kris, so welcome both of you back again.
Hello.
Hiya. As always, please do like, comment and ask questions throughout the session just so that we can make it as interactive as possible. So today we're going to be talking a bit about rejection and how to keep resilient after rejection, particularly from interviews. So whether that's because you've had no feedback, you've had feedback you don't agree with, maybe you've had more rejections than you'd like, or if you're in one of these kind of new multi-stage interview processes. So all of that we're going to touch on. And Kris and Katherine will be sharing tips to help with that. So to start with, we're going to go to our first question, which is what does resilience mean? And Kris, over to you.
Yeah, so I like to think of resilience in sort of two ways. So firstly, it's that bounce back ability in the moment. It's like, whatever life throws at you, that you can handle it, you can manage it, you can keep yourself grounded, and you can keep going. And the second part of resilience to me, it's that continuous keeping going in the face of prolonged adversity. So it's not just like the sudden things that happen, like the rejection from the interview, but it's that prolonged, as Sarah was just touching on, what happens when you've been chipping away at trying to find that new role for several months and you're kind of starting to lose heart. So to me, it's having the ability to manage both those things. And most importantly, being able to manage your emotions, knowing that you can handle your emotions in the moment, process those, and then turn those around so that you can move forward. Katherine, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I'd agree with all of that, Kris. I would define it as being your best for more of the time. So again, that very much around that bouncing back from adversity. I talk a lot around thriving rather than just surviving. How can we really keep ourselves resilient in times when things perhaps are difficult, as in rejection from an interview, as obviously one example of that. And I also think for me, resilience is really reflecting on things as a learning opportunity. We talked a little bit when we were preparing for this around the growth mindset. So it's not about thinking about things as a failure, but actually an opportunity to learn, adapt, adjust, be flexible and move on. And I think that is a really important part of resilience as well, in terms of actually how you can learn from whatever experience you've had, take that with you and adjust and adapt accordingly to be even better the next time. So I think that's also something I would touch on with resilience.
Yeah, and that's just a build on. I mean, that's so critical, Katherine. I think growth mindset is really at the heart of resilience, isn't it? In learning to see things in a different way. And I think also, equipping yourself with the resources to handle those, to be able to flip things in a different way, connecting with people that can support you and give you a different perspective, and also looking after your whole physical and mental well-being so that you've got the energy to deal with these things and think constructively about how you can reframe stuff.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. I mean, I know I've had a couple of clients that have said to me they don't really like the word resilient because it almost feels like it means how much can you take. So I think reframing that word, like you've said, and kind of thinking about the growth mindset is a really helpful way to look at that. So I'll definitely remember that next time I've got a client that says that. Okay, so over to you, Katherine. And what tactics can you suggest to get through rejection after interview?
Yeah, and this can be a really, really difficult time. We know that. And I think one of the most important things to start with is really acknowledge how you're feeling. I think that's something Kris already alluded to when we were talking about what resilience means for us. So acknowledging on whatever those feelings are and just allowing yourself some time to let them surface and explore them. But I would say if you are going to sort of allow yourself to wallow in that for a period of time, also make sure there's a limited amount of time that you do that for, because what we don't want to do is sort of stay in that despondent or anger or whatever those feelings are for long periods of time. So it's about acknowledging them, working through them, and then sort of at the right time, no more than a day, I would say, really think about, right, what can I do next? What can I do to start to take some actions forward? And I think that bit around, right, what can I learn and what can I take into the next time I'm in this situation, again, becomes really, really important there once you've allowed those feelings to surface and sort of moved on from them. The other thing I think is important is to just remember that if nothing else, that was still an opportunity for networking. So if you have been in an interview situation, you've made a connection with somebody, and there's no reason why you can't continue to have that connection, even if you don't end up being the right candidate for that role. And I've had a couple of clients actually who have kept in touch with people that they've been interviewed by, and it's come back later, and they have had opportunities that come through from it. So if nothing else, just thinking about how can I use this as an opportunity to keep a connection alive, I think is a really helpful way of just getting through that initial rejection. What about you, Kris? I know we talked about some other things as well.
Yeah, those are such great tips, Katherine. I really love the one, especially about the networking and just staying in touch and keeping the door open, because you never know what's going to happen. I think firstly, celebrate the fact that you got the interview, because goodness sake, that's, sometimes that's the hardest part of the job process, isn't it? So actually take time to give yourself a pat on the back that, hey, I got an interview. I've got some, hopefully some feedback, but if not, you're one step closer. You are one interview closer to that ideal role, because it's just a journey. It's a process. I think one of the key things I'd say is take action to open a new door. Okay. So don't just ruminate on this, this opportunity, this interview, this, I could have done this, I could have done that. Sure. You want to obviously take the learning and the feedback as much as you can and build upon that. And obviously, if there's something that you're thinking, okay, I'm seeing a bit of a pattern here in these interviews and something isn't working, then of course you want to look at that. Maybe it's your questioning, the way you answer questions, but equally you want to move on. You want to think, okay, who else can I contact? Who else can I email? Who else could I have a conversation with? Because that's going to pick you up. It's going to energize you, and you're going to feel a bit more motivated and excited. And I can't stress the importance enough, I think, of have a plan, have a career plan. This is just part of the process. I make so many contacts a day. I send out so many CVs a day. I have so many conversations a day. And you're just going through the numbers, because it is a bit like marketing. And we often have to go through a lot more numbers or conversations or people than we might expect sometimes, especially for trying to get into a new area. And accept that this has happened. This is okay. This is where I am. This is what, I need to improve on. This is what happened. I need to just move on, and think about how you want to respond to the situation, because that's probably one of the key aspects of resilience, is that paradigm shift to there is always a choice. Obviously, the initial thing is going to happen. You're going to, you're going to have a response to the rejection, perhaps. But most of those responses, that initial flight fright response, it's about 90 seconds it takes for that initial shock to go through the system. And then you can really start to calm down and think about how you're going to move things going forward. So that would be my top tips.
Okay.
I also thought we talked a little bit about mental self-care as well, didn't we? In terms of actually, is there something you can put in place to look forward to sort of give you something else to sort of focus on, as well as that rejection, in terms of really helping what you can do with your own sort of mental health and really look after yourself in times like these? I think that's also something that could be really helpful to do in a situation such as this.
Yeah, and I think what we were saying was that, that we've a bit of a theme. We've both said something about processing emotions, and you really do. That is probably one of the most helpful life skills you can learn, is how to just allow negative emotions, learn from them, unpick them, and go through them, because we often try and kind of push them away or get distracted or do something else to not look at them or not face them. And actually, the quickest way out is just usually to feel them, allow them, and then move on.
Okay, we've got a couple of comments coming through. So one of them, Zanatul, I'm going to put that up a little bit later, because we do have a question that's related to what you've commented on. But I'm going to put John's up now. So John's saying, good morning. Any suggestions on how to frame ghosting as a growth opportunity? 3 times in a row is tough to accept. So just to be kind of clear, what ghosting means is basically when you hear nothing after an interview. So essentially you may have put in all your time and effort, had a really good interview perhaps, and then never hear anything again. So any thoughts on that? So Katherine, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, and I think that is a particularly difficult situation, especially 3 times in a row. And I think the way I would personally reframe that is that the type of employer I want to work for? Because if they haven't even got the time to let you know how you've done, or even to let you know that perhaps you haven't got the job, which I guess you accept by default by the fact you've heard nothing back, I would question whether or not they are the right employer for me personally. I think that's where I would go first and think, okay, well, if that's my experience as a candidate, I wonder what that's like as an employee, and perhaps there are better roles out there for me. So that's probably where I'd go first in terms of sort of acknowledging it and then trying to move forward and think about, right, where else might be better suited for me. Kris, what are your thoughts?
I was going to say, I think I would probably reiterate that, because I got to be honest. I mean, this is something that it makes my blood boil a little bit, that this happens to people in the interview process. And not so much now, but people obviously there used to be more time and expense to even travel to an interview, and then to hear nothing is just kind of gets my goat up. But yeah, I mean, the best you can do really, I would say, like Katherine, that would be my first thought is, do I really want to work for an organization that doesn't even have the time of day to treat me like this? Equally, I'd also question, what else could it mean? I know it sounds crazy. It's so easy to take it personally and think there's something wrong, but sometimes there are genuinely reasons that people have ghosted you. Maybe someone's gone on holiday and they've dropped the ball, they've forgotten to get back. Maybe something has happened from a technology glitch. So I would be tempted, and I guess maybe it's just me because I have a bit of a persistent streak in my character. I would be tempted to try and follow up. I mean, not ridiculously so, but I'd give it a few more attempts than maybe just one, to see if you can get any feedback. And obviously, if you can't, at that point, you have to draw the line and accept it and move on. But I think in the first instance, I'd be curious as to, okay, do I want to work for them? But equally, could there be a reason, a non-personal reason, or even a rude reason why this has happened? And is it worth maybe trying to see if there's another way of getting any feedback? Is there anyone else that you can connect to in the company that can maybe give you an insight as to what's going on? But at some point, you've got to draw the line and go, right, time to move on to greener pastures, I think.
The other thing you could potentially do is, even if you've heard nothing, is there's still that personal reflection that you're able to do in terms of the growth mindset. So, how did I feel I perform? When I think back, how did I answer those questions? Were there things that I think I could have done better or differently? And what can I therefore still take from that into the next opportunity that I have? So I still think there's room for learning, even if you're only able to do it from your own self-reflection, if you're literally getting no other feedback. I still think there are things that you will be able to reflect on as you sort of re-experience the interview and think about what you might want to take from that. And then, as you say, Kris, draw a line under it at that point if they really have not come back to you at all.
I guess one final thing I might add on that would be, I think it comes down a little bit to having a really clear goal or sense of purpose, or knowing what it is that you're going for, but not necessarily being attached to how you are going to get there, i.e. any one particular interview or role being the thing or the one that's going to lead to that. And it does come back to a little bit of that, I guess it is a sales mentality. Well, it's a numbers thing. I've got to just keep going. Okay, this wasn't the right opportunity, but something else is going to come along elsewhere. And as Katherine said, you do the best you can to get the feedback, reflect, learn, try and get in touch in whatever way you can, so you're still on the radar. And then, you've got to obviously make a decision and move on.
Yeah, I mean, I know a few years ago I went for a role, and and it felt like it had gone really well, and I didn't hear anything for a few weeks. And I did keep kind of chasing by email, and then eventually what turned out was I did end up speaking to the guy, and what had happened is I was essentially second place. They had offered to someone else, and they were waiting for them to accept before they turned me down. So it just lengthened that whole process. And I was torn between, do I want to know that, or do I not want to know that? It is really difficult, but yeah, there's definitely some work to be done on processes and things like that, isn't there? To leave someone waiting just in case the first person doesn't get offered is not great.
Well, and
in reality, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Katherine.
I was just going to say, in reality, you might find that candidate has gone as well, because if you've left it so long, people will assume, oh, I've been ghosted, I'll look for something else. So you may not have the luxury of that time as an employer. I think there is definitely something to look at in terms of process there. Sorry, Kris, what were you going to say?
I was something similar. I was just going to agree. I mean, this is an employee's market right now. I mean, with the Great Resignation and people leaving and considering leaving, this is a process or a practice that needs to stop, really. And people that are in this hiring space really do need to think about how they are going about this process and how they're contacting people. It doesn't take that much time to get back to someone with some feedback and let them know something one way or the other. It's the decent thing to do, really, quite frankly. And in this day and age, I don't think employers can afford to take that for granted, because people are going to go elsewhere.
Yeah. And just as a final tip, I guess what I would try to do is get in touch with the person who had interviewed me. And I know you might not have their email address, but you can normally take a pretty good educated guess. If you go onto Google, you can find formats for company email addresses. So I think that's what I would try. So trying that, and possibly trying to phone a main switchboard number, something like that, to just try and get direct contact. Okay, so go back to our questions. So thank you for those questions that we've had. So Kris, we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but how do you manage your emotions?
Okay, yeah, this is obviously, we're having just said, oh, you need to process them. It's like, well, how do we do that? So I study quite a few different ways to help people work on emotions, and a really great body of thought, I guess, that I like is something called acceptance commitment therapy. And there's a great technique in there, and it's basically you name it. So you name whatever the feeling or the emotion is, so that you kind of identify it, and in that way you start to kind of objectify it a little bit. So you could say, I am feeling angry, I am feeling disappointed, or you could even put your name in front of it. Kris is feeling disappointed, or Katherine's feeling angry. And you just kind of try that out and see, well, you kind of get a bit of a different sense, don't you? Kind of immediately start to pull away from the intensity of that emotion. And then you notice it. You notice, what does that actually feel like in my body? Where am I feeling that sense of whatever it is? Is it in my stomach, my shoulders, my neck? For me, it's always in the gut. And, kind of almost imagine yourself breathing into that emotion and making space around it to just allow it to fill that space and letting it dissipate. And there's various techniques that you can also use. So if you can identify the thought, you can change the voice that's saying that thought in your head, make it like a little funny cartoon character. You could metaphorically put it in a little box and tie it to a balloon and watch it float away. You could put it on a leaf in a stream. And these are all little games that you can do, or you can put it on like words on a graffiti wall or on a computer screen. But the point of these exercises is that, and the other one you can do, which I love, is that you can actually sing it. So you can sing like to happy birthday. So Kris got rejected from an interview, don't know what she's going to do. But anyway, so it's a bit silly, right? But don't you immediately start to feel a little bit different? And then you can have a good laugh going, who is that loony girl to that? But the point is that there's different techniques you can use that you can learn how to process your emotions. You don't have to be at the mercy of them. And I'd say it's so much just about becoming aware and tuning into that. And I also like to put in a few mindfulness techniques as well, learning how to use the senses, like focus on what you're seeing or what you're hearing, or even like your sense of touch, rubbing your hands together or putting your feet on the floor. And it just changes your whole thought process and your whole physiology. If you the Wonder Woman pose, I'm sure everyone's heard of with Amy Cuddy, you just changing those things, it instantly gets you in a different frame of mind. So Katherine?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying there. The other thing that I personally find really helps me is obviously acknowledging the emotions like we've talked about and you've just shared there, Kris, but also getting into those thoughts that are behind the emotions. And I like to write them down. Yeah. So it will be things like, I always perform badly in interviews, or I'm never going to get a job, or I'm no good at this, or whatever it might be. I personally find writing those down and then challenging those thoughts and assumptions and thinking about what is the truth and what evidence do I have to think about that. So, I always perform badly in interviews. Well, actually, the last interview I went for, I came a close second. So therefore, and I got really positive feedback. So this interview may not have gone as well as I would have liked, but I do perform well in some interviews, and therefore I know I can again. I'm never going to get a job. Well, I have had a job in the past and I know I will get there again. It's just trying to reframe some of those thoughts. But I do find writing it down personally just gets it out my head. And then that allows the emotions to settle as a result of that. So those are things I would sort of add to what you were saying, Kris. Yeah, go on. You were going to say something.
Oh, sorry. So it's the usual thing. She sparked an idea, and that's absolutely a brilliant technique for challenging beliefs, or what Katherine has said, because until you're conscious of what it is that you're thinking, you can't really start to turn it around. And just a couple of other things I pick up on is like the use of words like always or never, because they're very absolute. They're very generalized. They're very general. They're not very specific. And also just the words that you use to describe, oh, that interview was a disaster. Oh, it was an absolute catastrophe. Oh, and just words like that, your brain doesn't really distinguish between, whether you're joking or you're serious when you say some of those words. And actually the language you use can be really, really powerful and impactful. So that's another thing, is thinking about, what's the story you're going to tell yourself and other people about that interview, and how does that make you feel when you hear yourself telling that story?
Great. We've had a couple of comments through. So Paul's saying the most frustrating for me was having to wait 5 weeks for a badly formatted automated generated email to say I hadn't got an interview.
Oh.
So yes, that is very frustrating. And Katherine saying on ghosting, if it's a HR role that you're pursuing, you could respond with feedback as to why they need you as a candidate. That's a really good point. And actually, I think actually, it's really good. And maybe for any role. So maybe, John, going back to your question, maybe it would be worth you sending them a message to kind of ask why you haven't had any feedback and how that makes candidates feel. It's good. It's a good thought, isn't it?
That is a great idea, because it also kind of empowers you, and you're kind of taking back that, hey, you'd be lucky to have me sort of thing. And even if you're not, maybe you aren't the right fit, but it also shows that you value yourself. And it's a very positive and proactive thing to do. I really love that as a suggestion.
Yeah, I do as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really good. And this is another slight variation on the same question, but how about controlling your emotions in the moment? So we were talking yesterday about, so say you get that phone call and it's not the news you want, and you maybe feel anger or upset. So what tactics can you think of to control those emotions? So Katherine, do you want to start with that one?
Yes, and again, that is something that may well happen. You might feel defensive, you might feel angry, you may not agree at all with what's being said. And I think there's something really important about coming out with professionalism and dignity in these situations. And also, you don't want to damage relationships that, as we've said, could be potential networking opportunities for you. So I think in the moment, just giving yourself an opportunity to pause and breathe. Breathing is really, really helpful for changing your physiological response. And so it starts to get your heart to beat slower, and therefore it can sometimes just allow some of those emotions to dissipate. And the other thing I would always say is have a stock phrase ready. So if you feel yourself getting heightened emotions or angry or frustrated or defensive, I always think something along the lines of, thank you for the feedback, or whatever it might be, just allows you to at least have responded in a way that isn't reacting in the moment. So I think breathing but really consciously breathing and giving yourself a moment and having a stock phrase that you're ready to say in those situations can really help you to control your emotions. Anything you'd add to that, Kris?
Yeah, I was just to build a little bit on what you said, because that's absolutely breathing. I mean, it sounds like such a simple thing to do, but actually it really makes a massive impact. And the key is whatever breathing technique you use, is that your inhale is shorter than your exhale, because it's as you're doing that exhale, there's a big nerve called the vagus nerve that runs through the body, and it just calms that nerve down, and that nerve kind of sends a signal to the brain to go, hey, everything's okay. But building back to what Katherine said, I love the idea of having that stock thing you're going to say, especially if someone's verbally giving you the feedback and you're kind of, having to manage that. Because remember what we said about the 90 seconds, having something like that gives you time to just collect yourself, take a few breaths. What I would do maybe in that moment as well is kind of use a bit of mindfulness. So, focusing on maybe something I can see really with great intensity. So for example, I'm looking at a plant right now, looking at, the leaves and the colors and the texture and so forth, or really focusing on something I can hear or something I can feel. There's a great technique. It's almost from an anxiety point of view, but I think it could work quite well just very quickly in a moment like this, is that you focus on, it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste, assuming you can taste anything. But it's just also, it's grounding yourself. It just kind of gives you that moment to just settle and calm down.
Yeah, that's good. And I was mentioning yesterday when we were having our prep that there was a call that I had when I was rejected from an interview, and I was pretty angry, I guess, and I just wanted to get off the call quickly. So it was kind of right. It's just sort of acknowledging what they were saying. But basically they had said to me, I was really an excellent candidate at stage 1 and they wanted to give me the job, but they had to do stage 2. And then at stage 2, they felt that someone else did better and they didn't know what had happened to me. And that's why they'd given it to the other person. And I was thinking, well, why did you not phone me and ask me what was wrong? Because actually what had happened is the night before the interview, my son had broken his collarbone. He was in a lot of pain. I didn't get very much sleep. So in hindsight, I should have rearranged that interview and then perhaps I would have got the job. But I think there was quite a lot of learning there also about, if someone's performing totally differently, then maybe it would be worth reaching out afterwards to find out what's wrong.
Definitely.
But for me, definitely now I would say to any client, if you're not totally prepared, at least let them know what's going on rather than just going along thinking I'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important.
And maybe think as well in those feedback situations, do you have to necessarily respond immediately? I mean, of course, if it's someone, you're having the conversation, that's a little bit different. But obviously, depending on what medium that feedback comes, if it's an email or something like that, can you give yourself time to just calm down, separate from it? And the other one I love, if you have a chance to do it, is journaling. So like what Katherine was saying, where you write down the thoughts. You can just do like a free form 5-minute, just write everything you're feeling on a piece of paper. And then the great thing about paper, you could burn it, you could throw it away, you could do all sorts of things with it. But it just gives you a way of getting it out. Or if exercise is your thing, go for a walk. Or I like to talk out loud to myself as I'm going for a walk with the dog. But, whatever it is that helps you to just get that initial surge of adrenaline and cortisol out of your physical being is a great thing to do.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so Jeffrey's added a comment saying, good afternoon, and on managing emotions, being kind to yourself, allowing yourself time to feel sorry for yourself, even a good cry, find it cathartic before refocusing on next steps and moving on. So yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? Acknowledging those emotions.
And don't we feel better if we have had a good cry? It completely releases it, and then we can move forward in a positive way. So yeah, completely agree with that, Jeffrey.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, I'm going to put up Xanatul's comment from earlier and then go into our next question. So people really underestimate resilience, especially if you've been out for, say, 12, 18, 24 months. Personally, telling people they will find a role or the right job will come along or they bounce back, etc., is so unhelpful. Okay, so and then our question that we had talked about was, there you go. If someone has been job searching for a long time, what advice do you have? So, Katherine, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point, and one to acknowledge that, it's very easy to say these things, but when you're actually in the moment experiencing this, it is very, very tough to keep going. But I do think there's something around taking one small step towards wherever you're trying to go. So keeping momentum is really key. So that first step towards the next thing will just by osmosis, you'll continue to do it. And so there's something about just taking the next step. So it can be a really small step, but the next step towards it, even when you feel like you really don't want to, I think is a very important part of this, because it does keep the momentum and it keeps you going. And the other thing I always think is interesting to reflect on is, so if I'm doing the same things over and over again and they're just not working for me for some reason, what could be the one thing I could do differently? What could I try that might just change the dynamic, change what's going on? Could it be practicing interviews in a different way? There's a lot of things on LinkedIn Live, on LinkedIn, that you can look at in terms of actually saying your answers out loud and getting feedback from them. It might be, instead of just applying for jobs, it might be going and trying to tap into your network, but doing something different. And that's another step towards momentum. I think both of those things just keeps you going. Kris, what else would you say?
Yeah, I love those tips, Katherine, especially the keeping going, and it's those small steps, because sometimes there's what we call a tipping point, as in, you're taking a number of, small steps, like what you're saying, towards a specific outcome, and you just keep going and going and going. You think, oh, this is ever going to work. And then all of a sudden something happens to tip the balance and it goes over. And I think also as well, taking those small steps every day, especially if you know what what it is that you really want, you're aligned with, your values and why this is important to you. What do you want to do? And continuing to persist and believe that you are worthy of getting it. and deciding that, hey, look, I don't know why all this stuff is happening to me, but I'll be are darn sure something good is going to come of this, because I'm not going through all this for nothing. Something good is going to happen somewhere. And it is having a little bit of faith that, there is a silver lining. It's always the case that we look back on things, several months later or even years later and go, oh, that was the best thing that could have happened because this happened as a result. And of course, it's not always easy to see those things in the moment. And it can sound really trite to say, oh, just look for the silver lining. It's not like that. It's making a conscious choice that, look, here's where I'm at. Here's the reality. Things aren't going so great, but I'm going to choose to look for something proactive or positive that I can focus on, because I know that by doing that, it's going to help me feel better and get more motivated in the moment so that I can keep going and keep chipping away at this, because it will work. And equally, I think to build on your point, Katherine, it's absolutely, if you're seeing that, look, I'm doing the same stuff again and again, the height of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results, right? So obviously continuing to look at, am I doing the right things in terms of my career path? Do I need a bit of help on my CV or my interviews or my networking or my connections? And I'll guarantee as well, the biggest thing I would say that I find often helps most people is talking to other people. That's probably one of the best small steps you can do, continuing to have conversations, network, use LinkedIn, go to events, put yourself in positions where you can interact with other people, because it will bring you up. Because we're not really meant to be resilient on our own. Okay, resilience is built through, I think, a large amount of connection with other people.
Absolutely. And one of the things you can do on LinkedIn is download all your connections into a spreadsheet. And that's really helpful. I know that's been really helpful to me, because what I then do is go in and add criteria to my spreadsheet. So kind of, how well do I know this person? How influential are they? Are they kind of a decision maker? And then I then kind of look at my top 10% of people and will go and approach those. For me, is if I'm self-employed, so if my work's a bit quiet, then I will make sure that I'm keeping in contact with that top 10%, because I know they're the people that will be able to kind of give me potential leads. And I think that's so true also in job seeking. Yeah. So whether it's for an actual role or if it's for advice. So I think that's a really useful exercise if you haven't done that. Okay, just see, we've got a final comment here from Xanatul. So he's saying some good tips. It is all psychological and mindset. I would advise others to keep a diary of how they feel through this process and what they have been doing for their job search. It can be helpful. So yeah, that's a really good point. And that goes back then to what you're saying, Katherine, doesn't it? So you can kind of see there if you are doing the same thing all the time.
Yeah. And see progress.
Showing that to people. Yeah, and see progress.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we are out of time now, so we'll head on to our top tip to leave with. So Kris, do you want to go first with your tip?
I mean, I suppose to kind of pull the whole thread together, it's got to come down to mindset. And I know that sounds like but it really is so true. It is the thing that is going to keep you going. I also think, having someone that you can work with to go through this process so that you're supported and you're not on your own is absolutely crucial. And me personally, something that I find for me that works is I'm particularly a fan of quotes. And I have like the different little phrases around. And when I'm feeling really bad or whatever, I look at those quotes and it does actually help me feel better and comfort me. So it'll be things like, this too shall pass. Your past does not define your future. And one of the best ones I love was one I actually heard when I went and saw Jason Manford perform, which was, just because you're struggling, it doesn't mean you're failing. So, and that always, that really, I think is very helpful to realize when you're going through, trying to stay resilient in the face of interviews and rejections.
Thank you, Kris. And Katherine?
Yeah, I think they're all brilliant tips you just said there, Kris. I think for me, it would still be this bit around thinking about every time you go through, even if it is a rejection after interview, as a learning opportunity and also a networking opportunity. So what can I learn and how can I still make a connection that may come back in the future for me? I think they're the things I would particularly focus on personally.
Yep.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully that's been useful to people. Next week is our 1-year anniversary of LinkedIn Live. So what I'm going to be doing is chatting to most of the coaches who have been on. So we'll be talking a bit about highlights and advice for next year. So look forward to seeing lots of coaches next week. So thanks again, Kris and Katherine. I just see a comment that's just come through. Okay, so John saying thank you. So
Oh,
thanks for joining, John. And then we've got another thank you from Xanadol. So thank you very much. It's really
Thanks.
great of you to have contributed. So thank you very much and see you next week.
Okay.
Thanks very
Bye.
much.
Bye.